I wake up at 6:30 a.m. on the dot. I don't need an alarm anymore. My mind's been wired to discipline for decades. I grind my beans fresh, slow pour into a heavy ceramic mug. Black, no sugar, no cream, just heat and caffeine. By 6:42, I'm at the desk. My inbox, zeroed. Portfolio dashboard, all green. 7 deals in motion, each north of $5 million, each with their own set of landmines. I've memorized the terrain. Client sentiment scores are high. One contract is on the verge of doubling its scope. I take a breath, open the CRM, and scan the movement overnight. Our Singapore lead pushed an MOU through after 6 months of courting. Quiet win. I don't reply. Not yet. Just flag it. My strategy's always been the same. Never chase the applause. Just deliver what no one else can, and let the scoreboard speak. My name is Marcus Vale. I'm 48 years old. Vice President of Strategic Partnerships at Novatech Systems, a software integration firm that sells turnkey ecosystems to governments and Fortune 500s alike. We don't make pretty apps. We make the invisible glue that holds their worlds together. I've been here for 13 years. Before that, I did contract strategy for Valor Group, back when they were still trying to pretend they weren't government adjacent. This, Novatech, is the only place I ever thought I'd retire from. But at 10:12 a.m., that idea dies. An Outlook ping drops into my screen. Quick sync. Boardroom. 5 minutes. No sender. No context. Just a shared calendar item that appears like fog on glass. The kind of thing that smells like dry ice before you even open the door. I walk in. The table's half full. Empty coffee cups, a faint lemon cleaner scent. And him, Eli Maddox. 27, founder's son, VP of Product Vision. Harvard hoodie zipped halfway, vape in one hand, tapping through Slack threads like he's solving cancer. He doesn't look up when I enter. "Marcus, hey," he says, finally glancing. "Take a seat." I don't. I just place my tablet on the edge of the table and stand. He slides a folder across the surface, casual, like it's a menu I asked for. "You're too set in your ways," he says. "We need younger energy, faster decisions." There's a pause where most men would talk, would protest, would ask if this was a joke, if this was about numbers, or personalities, or optics. But I don't. Because I already knew. I knew the moment Eli was added to my calendar 2 months ago under the label Shadow Sync. I knew when he started joining my calls and asking follow-up questions I never trained him to ask. I knew when he started replying to emails meant for me, CCing his buddies at CipherCore and calling it cross-pollination. I even knew when he pulled one of my junior analysts into a special task force under his direct report line. Every play was textbook. Plant the seed. Own the narrative. Cut the root. I close the folder without reading it. I don't even touch the pen. "You'll get your comp package," he adds, as if that softens the ritual. I nod once, pick up my tablet, slip it into my leather briefcase, fasten the clasp. "Nothing personal," he says, smirking faintly, like he thinks this is just business, like he believes I'll vanish into the suburbs, spend a few months in golf shirts, and then maybe take some consultant gig, whispering to SaaS startups. I smile, not the kind of smile that forgives, the kind that files things away. Then I walk out. No handshakes, no goodbyes, no words. They think it's over, that they've cleaned house, that the dinosaur finally wandered off into the tar pit. They think they just made the company younger, faster, hungrier. But what they really did was open a locked door, and I was the one holding the key. Most people thought my job was closing deals. Handshakes, steak dinners, neat contracts, signed with Mont Blanc pens, and celebratory drinks that pretended to mean something. They assumed I was just the closer, polished, persuasive, maybe a bit dated, but still effective. The old warhorse who pulled across the finish line what the kids in product and marketing could barely lift. Let them think that. I preferred it that way. The truth was quieter. I wasn't just the guy who signed clients. I was the one who designed the cage that kept them. I built Novatech's client trust framework from the ground up, back when we still called ourselves a boutique SaaS integrator and had to prove we weren't just another resume pile of ex-consultants chasing seed rounds. I drafted the first service-level agreement. I scoped the first security protocols. When legal didn't know how to standardize third-party risk terms, I did. When the founders needed a CRM, I didn't pick Salesforce. I built one. Custom modular, silent. I named it Thorn, after my mother's maiden name. She taught me chess when I was 6, then taught me how to lose without blinking. Thorn was my board, and every client was a piece I moved deliberately. The team used it daily. They just didn't know every interface was a skinned-down version of the original. Mine had a different name. The Ledger. Buried behind 4 layers of credentials and a protocol fork that routed access through a nondescript archive node in South Dakota. The Ledger was my own. A mirrored instance of every deal, every negotiation note, every unlogged call I ever took. Time-stamped, transcribed, and cross-referenced with behavioral metadata, I tagged manually, like a detective who didn't trust the badge. When I onboarded a new account, I didn't just study their organization chart. I mapped personality vectors. I flagged stress tics. I recorded tone variances from quarter to quarter. I knew which CFOs drank too much and which COOs were sleeping with their travel VPS. They thought I was a salesman. I was a pattern analyst. Every contract that got signed went through my encryption shell, not just for security, but for traceability. I embedded version watermarks into every PDF, tracking which legal assistant downloaded what clause and when. I masked one-time tokens behind legalese that most clients skipped, which meant I could fingerprint any leak down to the click. My fine print wasn't just legal armor, it was intel. And the scripts? Every sales deck that worked, every closing line that made procurement teams fold, I wrote those too, quietly. Let the junior reps slap their names on them if it made them feel brave. I only cared about the outcome, because outcomes are binary, win or loss, control or chaos. Eli never saw it. He was too busy vaping through investor demos, talking about reimagining user modularity, like he'd invented the cloud. What he didn't realize was that the ledger had been tracking him too, not just his calendar drift and decision bottlenecks. Real things, quiet things. In the last 2 years, I flagged 11 internal compliance breaches tied to Eli's project groups, unapproved contractor usage, expense reports that didn't match flight manifests, late-night access logs to sensitive environments from unsecured hotel Wi-Fi. Twice, he routed pre-deal architecture decks to advisors who didn't appear on any NDAs. I saved the file hashes. I saved the IP logs. I saved the Slack snippets where he told a product manager to just ship it. We'll fix legal later. Each one stored, each one time-stamped, each one legally retrieved under standard audit permissions. He never asked where the backup systems routed. He didn't even know we had them. Thought IT just handled it. They didn't. I did. They never understood the real infrastructure of this company. Not the cloud servers, not the code base, not even the culture. The real infrastructure was trust, strategic, conditional, and enforced through quiet architecture. And I was the one who built it. Every deal, every client, every escape hatch welded shut with invisible welds. They didn't even know what they owned. But I did. Eli thought he fired a salesman. He fired a forensic mirror. The press release was 3 sentences long. Novatech Systems announces the departure of Marcus Vale, former Vice President of Strategic Partnerships. We thank him for his years of service and wish him well in future endeavors. A search for his replacement is already underway. No quote from me. No farewell message. Not even a stock photo from the holiday party 6 months ago, where Eli grinned beside me like we were a leadership team instead of a slow-motion car crash waiting to happen. That same afternoon, Eli went on a podcast, one of those startup speak shows hosted by a guy who wears hoodies, to investor summits and calls burn rate grit. Eli spoke for 40 minutes about disruption, velocity, and the need to make bold decisions, even when they're uncomfortable. He never mentioned my name, but he used words like legacy friction and cultural overhaul, which told me everything I needed to know. Publicly, I said nothing. Privately, I went to work. The first thing I did was pull up my ledger instance, not to hunt, just to remind myself of what already lived in the vault. The call logs, the IP traces, the overlapping vendor invoices. Eli wasn't sloppy. He was overconfident. That was worse. He believed in noise, momentum, smoke-thin strategy masked with buzzwords and borrowed credibility. He didn't think someone like me would keep receipts. He never imagined I might be listening. I scheduled 3 drink invitations within the week, one with an executive from Resilon Tech, another from Kelstar Systems, and a third with an old friend now at Dynoptic Global. All 3 of them were direct competitors. I chose upscale neutral bars in the city, nothing flashy, nothing forgettable. I ordered the first round each time, asked about their kids, their staffing pipelines, their overseas expansions. I never offered anything, but I watched them lean in. They asked what happened at Novatech. I said I needed a break. They asked if I had plans. I said not yet. They asked if I'd seen the stock dip. I said I hadn't noticed. I let the pauses do the talking. Let the words I didn't say form their own conclusions. People trust silence more than spin. Back home, I queued the calls, the recordings I'd made over the last 7 months. Not all were useful, but a handful stood out. Eli talking to a consultant named Adair Jensen, a man with no LinkedIn footprint, no corporate registration, and a burner number linked to a Delaware shell. They talked in circles, machine learning edge prediction, synthetic training loops, auto-acquisition of user data. But under the jargon, the message was clear. They were setting up a back-channel acquisition play involving a smaller AI firm, one that had quietly built a predictive behavioral engine scraped from third-party analytics without full compliance review. Worse, they were planning to announce interest after establishing internal testing, bypassing standard disclosure timelines. The kind of move that makes the SEC salivate. I trimmed the recordings, stripped metadata, and ran voice scramblers to keep identities masked. Just enough distortion to preserve deniability while keeping the core intact. I created 3 encrypted packages, each one unique, and routed them to 3 board members. No note, no explanation, just a subject line. Due diligence. Urgent. It didn't take long. By the end of the week, Novatech announced a closed-door board review session to align on near-term operational priorities. An internal memo leaked that same night. Concern over vendor partnerships, audit irregularities, legal pre-checks being escalated. Eli didn't know yet. He was still posting product mock-ups on Twitter, still doing hallway interviews with tech blogs about embracing asymmetry. But the fault lines had already started to ripple. The board wasn't reacting to an ex-employee. They were reacting to risk. And risk spreads fast when it wears a smiling face. I watched it all unfold from my living room, laptop open, drink in hand. Some people scream when they fall. Eli was still smiling on the way down. The call came at 7:04 a.m., just as I was pouring my second cup of coffee. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. Marcus. The voice was dry, clipped, worn down in that way only someone on their fourth decade in the corporate trenches can be. It was Damon Trask, former CFO, now a board lifer. He'd hired me at Novatech 13 years ago, back when the offices were still carpeted in rental beige, and we tracked milestones on a whiteboard. "Are you doing this?" he asked. I didn't pause. No. I let the silence stretch long enough to make a point, then added, "I already did." He didn't reply, just exhaled through his nose and hung up. By noon that day, the thread started to split. 3 of our 5 biggest clients filed termination notices, quietly, precisely, and completely within their rights. Their NDAs had a clause I'd personally written into each deal, one that allowed immediate disengagement in the event of substantiated executive misconduct affecting contract compliance. Most people had skipped over it. Legal usually flagged it, asked if it was really necessary. I always smiled and said the same thing. It's just insurance. Now it was a fuse. The moment the first client pulled, the others followed, not because they wanted to, because they were watching the signs, watching the tremors, watching Eli pretend to steer a ship that had already been holed below the waterline. I didn't say a word to the press. I didn't send out any messages, make any anonymous tips, or issue any dramatic LinkedIn manifestos. All I did was forward a neutral legal brief, unsigned, generic, through a third-party mailbox service. It laid out the right to terminate, the reasons why it was being exercised, and the company's failure to provide compliance verification when requested. No emotion, just facts. The press picked it up within 24 hours. Client instability hits Novatech. Market confidence slips amid strategic exodus. The headlines didn't scream, they whispered, and that was worse, because whispers sink stock prices faster than scandal. Novatech's value dropped 14% overnight. Investors started asking questions. Analysts revised ratings. And Eli, brilliant blind Eli, tweeted out a 6-word masterclass in self-delusion. Restructuring for speed. Get ready, world. The market didn't care. Speed doesn't matter when you're headed for a wall. Inside the boardroom, things unraveled quickly. A routine budget audit exposed $6.3 million in consulting expenses, routed through a series of shell vendors, all under Eli's signature, all unreported in the investor summaries. Each vendor traced back to thin paper Delaware core, with overlapping mailing addresses and non-existent staff. The kind of setup used when someone wants a budget line to vanish without a trail. But trails never really vanish. They just fade, until someone shines the right light. And I had plenty of light. I watched from a distance as the panic turned from internal to public. I read the early morning memos, the shareholder updates, the vague PR statements about an internal review of expenditures. No one mentioned Eli by name. Not yet. But the scent was there. Blood in the water. The thing about corporate power is that it's never personal until it's collapsing. They'll laugh at your expense, sideline you with a smile, and dress your execution in soft words like strategic reallocation. But the second you hit back, and you hit smart, they panic. Not because of ethics, but because control is an illusion, and they just realized who was actually pulling the threads. I didn't gloat. I didn't cheer. I just kept watching. Quiet, focused, precise. They wanted younger energy, They got a toddler playing with matches. The board issued the statement at 6:31 a.m., just early enough to catch the East Coast markets, just late enough to look like they hadn't slept. Effective immediately, Eli Maddox was removed as Chief Strategy Officer and acting head of product innovation. The language was sterile, like all surgical extractions. Failure to align with internal compliance protocols, material breach of fiduciary responsibility, unanimous board consensus, no severance package, no soft exit, no podcast interview to spin it. He didn't even get to clean out his desk. The SEC announced an inquiry less than 12 hours later. The DOJ followed by the end of the week. Terms like corporate malfeasance, vendor fraud, and willful deception began circulating in legal blogs and quietly rephrased earnings reports. Trading was halted for 48 hours, while Novatech tried to staunch the hemorrhaging. But everyone could already smell the blood. They called an emergency press conference. The CEO did that thing executives do when they know it's already over. Tight suit, tight jaw, too much eye contact with the teleprompter. She said they were reevaluating oversight structures and committed to full transparency. No one cared. The street had already made up its mind. I didn't make a statement, didn't return the calls. I watched the frenzy from a distance, anonymous, untouched. My name never came up. It didn't need to. I hadn't leaked a thing. I hadn't published a whistleblower memo. I hadn't needed to. I just opened the right doors and let the truth walk out on its own. The real kill shot came in the form of a press release 2 days later. Quiet, one paragraph, buried in a stack of Thursday afternoon headlines. I'd joined Velonex Industries as Executive Director of Strategic Architecture, one of the companies I used to beat consistently in deals. The same company that once called my pitch deck antiquated. They reached out 3 weeks ago. They didn't ask for proof. They already knew what I'd done. They had one condition. If I came on board, I'd bring my playbook, not just the CRM skeletons or the contract templates, the philosophy, the operating code. I agreed, on paper, but inside, I already knew. The next time someone called me set in my ways, it would be with respect or fear. That night, I sat alone at a quiet bar off a side street in the financial district. Nothing trendy. Dark wood, low lighting, soft jazz playing through a speaker older than the bartender. I was sipping a neat pour of Cavalan Solist when the screen above the bar flipped to breaking news. There he was, Eli, in handcuffs, stepping out of a black SUV outside the Southern District Courthouse. His jaw clenched, blazer wrinkled, eyes scanning like he still thought there might be a way out. There wasn't. His father wasn't returning calls. Investors had cut ties. No statements, no denials, just silence. I didn't toast. I didn't smirk. I just watched. And for the first time since the morning, he slid those termination papers across the boardroom table, fingers still tapping his phone. I let myself remember the moment in full clarity. "You're too set in your ways," he'd said, like I was a busted algorithm, like I was just another thing to replace. That morning I smiled because I had to. Now, I smiled because I didn't. You don't fire the rainmaker and expect sunshine. You drown.